Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas podcast, where we embark on a journey through our diverse Texas landscapes and breathtaking trails while always engaging with our amazing Texas hiking community. So settle in, tighten up those bootlaces, and get ready for the thrilling tales awaiting for you on this episode.
Excellent. Yeah. So this question reminds me of the water question, right? When you're prepping for a hike in the Guadalupes, or you're gonna hike the maybe one of those canyon trails at the various state parks that you have in Texas, or maybe you're gonna be on the Lone Star. You're definitely thinking about water and days and how much do I need and where can I access it. Wildlife in Washington is relatively similar to that in that we don't really think that much about it.
No.
There just isn't. So we have little to no ticks in Western Washington. There are no poisonous spiders in Western Washington. We have no poisonous snakes. And so, obviously
So what you're saying is boring.
where you live at, you have to think about snake bites and ticks, and we have none of that.
Hogs.
Yeah, no, there's no wild pigs, no wild hogs here. We have a super abundance of deer. There's definitely mice. Like that's definitely a thing you have to think of when you think of food storage. If you're backpacking in very popular places, sometimes the mice will definitely try to get into food.
They'll chew through your tent.
They will absolutely chew through your tent. Yep. And then the most well known though is we do have bears and we do have mountain lions. Bear attacks from black bears in Washington State are very, very rare. Mount Rainier is 110 years old now, and there's never been a black bear attack on a human being in Mount Rainier National Park ever. There usually is one or two per year, but that's what I have no idea how many people go hiking, day hiking in Washington State in a year, but it's got to be in the millions. So
yeah, what do you think the chances are that you would run into a bear, like percentage wise? Yeah,
it depends on which trail you're going on, but like a lot of the coastal hiking trails out in the Olympic National Park, not the ones where you're just like parking and then walking 100 yards to the beach, but the ones where you're actually like walking down sections of the coast and stuff. Those are just replete with black bears. I mean, I would say the chances are better than 50% that you'll see one. And it's, if you come from a part of the country with no bears, I understand it's being around bears is unsettling. I mean, I still, even as many as I've seen in my life, I definitely I'm on high alert when a bear's around. I know full well that if it decides to have that particular opinion about me, that I'm lower on the food chain than it is. I get it. Like it's, it is a very, very uncomfortable feeling, but as long as you're smart about bears, bears aren't going to do anything to you. Not black bears, at least anyways. There are definitely bears in the far north that will, up in Alaska where my in-laws live, but not black bears in Washington, unless it's some sort of a highly unusual scenario where one is injured and elderly or something and is unable to provide for himself and he may become an opportunist. The one thing though that you do need to be careful about with bears is food storage. I mean, that is a huge way in which most of the time when bears do something to people, it's often that there's been a history of poor food storage, and then bears have come to associate with people as a source of food. Foraging is a lot of work, but if you think about how many calories are you going to have in your backpack on your next trip to the Guadalupes? I don't know.
Yeah.
6, 7, 8,000. I mean, imagine being a bear and realizing, oh, all I got to do is take that little pack from that guy right there, and there's 8,000 calories inside that thing. Normally it takes me 3 days to try to forage 8,000 calories.
So is there any regulations or policies by Washington about food storage and what you have to do by law?
Yep.
At some of these places?
Yes, correct. So there definitely are places where you have to have a bear can, which is basically just a very heavy duty plastic can. I should have had one down here that I could show you. And you just have to carry all your food in that. Nobody likes doing it because it's heavy and it's bulky. You don't fit into your backpack very well. But honestly, you're going to carry about 16 pounds of water on your next trip to the Guadalupes. A bear can weighs way less than 16 pounds. So.
I would much rather carry that. I mean, my next trip to the Guad in a couple of weeks, I'm literally thinking just carrying enough water to drink, so 2 liters a day, and just taking bars or something where I'm not having to carry extra water for cooking, not taking a stove. Like, I'm really starting to try to manipulate my,
Yeah.
my pack and what I normally carry and see
Yeah.
if it would make sense.
You can get back some of those 16 pounds, but you're not going to get back all of them.
I don't even know that I'll get back a pound, but hey, every what did you tell me? Every ounce, every gram counts.
Yeah. No, I mean the nice thing about water though is your pack's going to get drastically lighter day by day by day. I mean that's definitely a plus.
And I even thought about going up early and just caching some water, just running up real quick, caching a couple, 3 or 4 liters, and then doing like our day 1 hike. And then of course being able to catch that on the day 2 and day 3. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but so think about this. I have to have a bear story or two, but while you're thinking about that, what should hikers do if they encounter a black bear and or a mountain lion? And I know for me, Connor and I ran into a black bear at Big Bend. She had a cub, and she was probably about 40 yards from us, and she could give 2 craps about us. She looked up, she saw us, we saw her. I froze, and she just went back to foraging. And of course, Connor's like, Dad, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, I don't know about you. I can outrun you. I don't know what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like, it's just like when I used to live in Indonesia, and you would see sharks, and I was so mesmerized, like, oh my God, this is actually a black bear, how cool, or this is actually a shark, how cool, that I never went into, hey, wait a minute, that's a shark, or hey, wait a minute, that's a bear. I was just like, maybe I was seeing it on TV or something. I was so excited.
Yeah.
But what should the actions be while we're on the trail?
Yeah, number one is you never want to surprise a bear. So when you're walking in places that are dense, like the vegetation is super dense, and you could be getting close to one and not know it, you just need to make human noise. Make noise that, like, if you're in a group, just normal human conversation is plenty. But if I'm by myself, and I do hike a lot by myself, I will very often, I mean, about every 60 seconds, I literally just yell, "Hey bear, hey bear," and I do that a lot because I don't want to surprise one. And that is especially pertinent when the wind is blowing in your face. So bears, they don't hear really well. I mean, they have okay hearing, but it's not any better than ours. But they smell very well. They say that a bear's sense of smell is 700% greater than that of a bloodhound's. So they in almost every single scenario, they will smell you coming. So they knew you were there because they smelled you. But if you're walking directly into the wind to where you're downwind of them, they sometimes wouldn't pick up your scent. And that's a majority of the time when a bear does, attack someone. It's that you surprise them. They don't like being surprised. And so, yeah, rule number one is don't surprise them. People sometimes wear bear bells. You'll see those a lot. Fair number of people.
Is that more annoying for other hikers to have somebody wearing a bell?
I think so. More.
I would rather you yell "Hey bear" every 60 seconds than me hearing a ding-a-ling-a-ding-a-ding the whole hike.
It's normal. I think locals, the locals to the PNW probably are yelling "Hey bear." Probably not very many locals are wearing the bells. That's often tourists. But, yeah.
Listeners, no bells.
Yeah.
Just yell.
And then, all the bears that I've seen, with one or two exceptions. I did get between a mom and a cub, and she did get very angry with me. And there was a
She
bluff
charged
charge.
y'all,
And
didn't she?
yeah,
Yeah.
I was by
So
myself.
so tell us about that. You're just
So that was
coolly
up.
doing down the trail and
That was at Chinook Pass. That's that spot I told you where the highway crosses the PCT, or the PCT crosses the highway, and there's just trailheads there. This was the day that it had opened, so it would have been June, probably June or late May. The DOT is usually pretty early about getting that open. So this is just snow. It's just solid snow. They get they plow the road, and so when that highway opens up in June, like the walls of snow on the sides of the road are 6, 7, 8 feet deep still. And I was doing some climbing, just climbing some of these little small satellite peaks that are near the highway there. Up there by myself, and it was so no humans had been in there for months and months and months. It's pretty void of any human activity, and which usually means bear activity. And I had summited a peak, and I was kind of working my way down the shoulder to the saddle. I had kind of got down to timberline to where there was a lot of scraggly trees and stuff, and had my ice axe in my hand still from the descent. It had been down deep snow, and I was going to head over towards this other peak, and all of a sudden I heard crying, and I immediately knew what it was. It was cubs, and bear cub. They'll cry almost like a human toddler will cry. It's a weird, just this weird wah 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 sound. And they immediately, I see two cubs, and they're running up a tree, and they're just freaked out that I'm there. And for somehow, I don't know how on earth they didn't hear me coming or smell me coming or what. I mean, I had crampons on, and it was icy, and I had an ice axe in my hand, and I was regularly. The one thing that happens when you're walking in crampons is the snow likes to ball up underneath of them. And so you'll take your ice axe and you'll swat the side of your crampons to knock the snow balled up out of them. And I had been doing that, but somehow or another they didn't hear me coming, and those bear cubs ran up a tree, and then instantly I'm just spinning around in circles trying to figure out where mom's going to come from. And sure enough, I was right in between them and her. And she was mad, huffing and puffing, and they do this thing where they clack their jaws. It's this really nasty, uncomfortable, hair-raising clacking sound where they pop their jaw in and out. She did that, and then she charged at me. I was probably, I don't know, 40, 50 yards away, and she charged about 10 yards straight at me and then stopped. And I was like, I thought I was going to die, I was like, okay, I'm gonna die fighting a bear. This is how. At least I had an ice axe.
how epic of a story, John died fighting a bear.
Nobody wants to have hand-to-hand combat with a bear, but I suppose an ice axe is about as good as you could do if you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, she pulled up. She only closed about a third of the distance and stopped, and then that told me, just knowing a little bit about bear behavior, I was like, okay. She's super mad that I'm here and wants to defend her cubs, but she doesn't want to, have it out with me. And so that was just, I can remember going from terror to just afraid at that point, because I knew if I can just be smart about this and interpret her behavior and play my cards correctly, she's going to let me go. And so immediately I started like working away from the cubs, backing up. I didn't dare turn my back to her, but I started backing away to where I was getting further and further from the cubs, and then she would start to follow me. And then as soon as she would follow me, I would stand my ground. I was like, I'm not going to let you chase me. You know what I mean? If you'll just stand still, I'll leave, but you're not going to chase me. So I'd start backing, and then I'd start backing up again, and she'd start following me again, and then I'd stand my ground and wave your arms in the air and try to look big and sound menacing. And I was smacking my ice axe on some rocks and my crampon tines and stuff to make noise, and yelling at her. And then I was literally talking to her. I don't know. That's sort of stupid, but it's like, I'm trying to leave, but you have to let me leave, And then anyway, we did this whole I would move a little bit until she would follow me, and then I would stop, and then and we did that several times, and then eventually she let me leave. But unfortunately, the way that I left was the opposite way from my car, so I ended up having to like
Oh
circumnavigate
man.
all the way around this other peak to get back around to the road, and then walk the road back to the back to the car. But yeah, that was probably the scariest encounter I ever had with a bear.
Jeez. What about mountain lions? How active are they up there, and how often do hikers run into them?
Extremely rare. I've never seen one. The only mountain lion I've
Yeah.
ever seen was in Big Bend, in Texas.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've seen their prints many times, but I've
Yeah.
never seen a lion. And the thing about mountain lion attacks is there's really nothing you can do to prepare for them. I mean, they don't. Here's the big difference between and this is true of all cats actually. When a cat is going to attack you, doesn't matter whether it's a jaguar or a mountain lion or even something small like a bobcat. Um, they do so with the element of surprise in mind, so you'll never know they're coming.
Yeah.
Whereas when a bear attacks you, doesn't matter whether it's polar bear, grizzly bear, or black bear, they're going to let you know ahead of time that they're about to do it.
Yeah.
So they announce that that violence is what they have in mind, and you have a few seconds to think about that before it occurs. But
Yeah.
lions won't do that. They'll always attack you from behind, and I mean, I don't know, watch me, but they just don't.
Yeah.
They don't generally attack people. It does happen.
Yeah.
We've actually had more mountain lion attacks in the last 10 years than we've had bear attacks, and I don't know. There's something definitely like skin crawling and scary about mountain lion attacks for sure. Some cat jumping on the back of your neck, but
Yeah. Yeah, they're very opportunistic, and it often seems like they can judge the weakest person in the party.
yeah, I was gonna
Like
say
they're
probably the only thing that you can do to safely deter mountain lion attacks is just be in groups.
uh,
Not be alone. I've never heard of a lion attacking a group.
yeah,
Always going to be an individual, and typically a smaller individual.
yeah. Hike with your child.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so that's we're I'm in Guadalupe a lot, and that's one of my bucket lists is just to be on a peak somewhere and
see one off in the distance.
yeah, see one off in the distance. And Henning, the guy that I usually hike and climb with, he's an ex sniper, and so he has the scopes and stuff that
Yeah,
one day we're going to go out there and just have that spotting scope and
hang out and find
dusk
one.
and dawn and just see if we can spot one. There was a group that were hiking up the Guadalupe Peak Trail, and they said that they stumbled across a mountain lion. He was just sitting there watching them, and
Yeah,
they were hiking at dark, or it was they were hiking up to the peak for the sunrise, and group of kids, and then they saw one. And I'm like,
yeah.
I wish I would have been with them. All right, so less dangerous wildflowers. I think I know the answer to this, but what is the best trail in Washington for hikers to go to see the wildflowers?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be the skyline at Mount Rainier. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
that was my
nothing.
guess.
There's plenty of other ones. Hurricane Ridge is over there up on the Olympics, on the northern side of the Olympics, is fantastic for avalanche lilies and a lot of like the early wildflowers, like right after the snows go away. But yeah, I mean, they named it Paradise for a reason.
No. And
Yeah,
what was crazy about when we went are all the native berries.
yeah.
I mean, they're everywhere. Like you're driving down the highway, you're on a hiking trail. They are everywhere.
Yeah, loads and loads and loads of blackberries, and then up in the mountains too. There's wild strawberries,
Yep.
raspberries. Yeah, lots and lots of berries in the mountains. Yeah, and that's
So-
hence the bears, right?
Yeah. So when you're hiking, are you like partaking in the berry feast?
Yeah, from time to time I do.
Yeah.
Definitely when I'm backpacking. If I'm backpacking in the autumn when I know there's going to be a lot of berries, I definitely would like just bring plain oatmeal, and then you just fill up with alpine blueberries or whatever in your oatmeal, and you don't have to carry it.
Yeah, that was kind of the biggest shock to me is I'm talking like as far as the eye could see, are just berry bushes or
Yeah.
berry vines, or I don't remember how they were at, but it was just like, wow, that was to me pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So what about the old growth forest in Washington? Is
Hmm.
that is it really kind of considered just on the Olympics, or is it just Washington in general? Because that's I know the Olympics are absolutely spectacular. Like we've been to a lot of places, but there was nothing. If you just like big, massive trees and the coloration that goes into this kind of like I guess a tropical forest, it was spectacular.
Yeah, the trees in the Pacific Northwest are some of the biggest in the world. And that's why we're the number one producer of lumber for building houses in the world by far. That's what I do for a living, by the way. I've
Yeah,
worked in a sawmill all my life, and yeah, we still do have a lot of old growth forests. Um, they're all over Washington. Logging is obviously one of the huge industries for the economy here in the Pacific Northwest. And it doesn't always, some of the history of logging isn't always pretty. Um, we weren't we weren't very environmentally conscious, in the early stages of America and much of anything, whether it's cutting down like all the forests or the killing of the American buffalo or whatever it may be.
yeah,
But for the most part, we've we've understood the mistakes of our past and are making wise and intelligent decisions. So there's lots and lots of working forests in Washington that I mean every major player in the timber industry up here is replanting trees faster than they're cutting them down. But there
yeah,
are still lots and lots and lots of old growth forests that you can go and visit. The Gifford Pinchot National Forest is the one that's closest to me. I can get to the edge of it in about a half-hour drive from here. It's huge, takes up like the whole south central portion of Washington, and there's old growth trees everywhere down in there. But it is definitely, it's kind of iconic. Like, what is it that we're known for here? He asked that question early on when we first started. I mean,
coffee and trees.
apples is one of those things. The quarters that they made, where they made a new quarter for each state.
Yeah,
What are you going to put on it? That was a big thing in Washington. I think they ended up putting killer wells on ours because the San Juans north of
yeah,
the like in between the northern part of the peninsula up there and then Canada is famous for whale watching and killer whales. And so orcas, we have lots and lots of orcas
oh wow,
in the waters of Pacific Northwest. But could have done apples, could have done salmon because we're famous for salmon runs here. Could have done Mount
what about
Rainier.
cherries?
That's more a little bit further east, like Montana
Yeah,
is really famous
okay,
for
I
cherries.
just remember.
Montana and Idaho. But I would say, like, what's the what if we were to sum up Washington State in a symbol? I would say it's an old growth fir tree.
Yeah,
It's what you got tattooed on your forearm there.
boom.
Yeah, the fir trees in the mist.
So do they have are there like protection for these types of forests?
Sure. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah,
We do definitely have lots and lots of forests that are just designated old growth and they're not to be cut down. But you'd be surprised how you can go out to sections that were logged, and very often the timber owners, whether it's Weyerhaeuser or Sierra Pacific or whoever it may be, Stimson, they'll have signs, logged in 1986 and then replanted in 1987 or 1988, and you'd be shocked how much a replanted stand of fir trees can grow up in just 40 or 50 years. Um,
really.
yeah. The trees here are big. Like they're certainly there's forests all through the Rockies, but the trees in Washington and Oregon are definitely larger than anywhere else in the country.
So what are some the unique geological features that a hiker can find in Washington?
Yeah, well, volcanoes. I mean,
Yeah.
Mount St. Helens.
That's crazy. Like
If you're a geology nerd, like Mount St. Helens is the place to go.
yeah, like we're sitting there, right? And I mean, we're across the little canyon from Mount St. Helens, and I'm just thinking like there's or the times we were at Rainier, like there's a chance this thing could erupt.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's,
so I mean, they call it the Ring of Fire, as a geologist will call it. But from Mount Garibaldi up in British Columbia down to Mount Shasta in Northern California. So, I mean, just thinking about some of those, you got what Jefferson and Hood and the Three Sisters down in Oregon, and then here in Washington we have St. Helens and Adams and Rainier and Baker. Those are all volcanoes, and they all have erupted. Most recently was Mount St. Helens, but there's been some other famous ones. I mean, Mount Shasta had a large eruption in the 1880s or 1890s, and some of them are still quite active. There are like Mount Hood is. I've climbed Mount Hood a few times, but there's an area about 1,000 feet below the summit on Mount Hood called the Devil's Kitchen. And they call it that because the mountain just spews out sulfuric acid all the time. And it stinks. I mean, it smells like rotten eggs. It's just, volcanic gases. In fact, one time I was I was up there doing a steep snow class with Brandon. This is when I was had first met him and hired him as a guide. But we were on the Hog's Back just above Devil's Kitchen, and all of a sudden you can hear and feel like rumbling. I mean, and like instantly our heads like whipped around to the horizons,
oh
and we're trying to
man,
figure out where the thunderstorm is. It sounded exactly like thunder, like close thunder. And but there's no, I mean, it was cloudy, but thunderstorms always have a distinct look to them. You know how the clouds in a thunderstorm are dark. The typical clouds that we have in the Pacific Northwest are just kind of a light matte gray. Doesn't, like a thunderhead looks very different than our typical clouds, and it was just plain gray clouds, and we're like, where the heck's the thunder coming from? You know what I mean? And then we heard it again, and like I literally could feel. I mean, it was like the ground I was standing on was moving, Jason. And I was like, and then all of a sudden, like, I kid you not, like the mountain, it like burped. And then like this huge plume of steam just come like blowing out of the Devil's Kitchen area. And I was like,
nope,
what the heck?
nope.
Let's get the heck out of here. And nothing else happened. I mean, that ended up being the extent of it, but it was like, I didn't have a category in my mind for that. It was so frightening because it was like, I know thunderstorms and I've done thunderstorms, but I've never done a volcanic eruption.
Man,
But yeah, all of the big volcanoes around here have various areas on them where you'll have hot springs. A lot of hot springs in the Pacific Northwest. I should have mentioned that. That's another thing that a lot of tourists like to do, and locals too. There's various hot springs that you can hike to and visit here, but all a result of volcanic activity. I've already mentioned this a few times with the enchantments and some other things, but there is granite here. So up in the North Cascades, you'll actually have a couple of peaks that are volcanic, and then right next door to them, there's peaks that are granitic, just like you get in down in like Yosemite or Kings Canyon.
and you talked about Hood. I mean, like one thing about hiking in Colorado and hiking in Washington's a lot different is a lot of these peaks and stuff people die on. Like it's it's you hike in Texas and yeah, if you're hiking in the summer, heat stroke and heat exhaustion. But man, you step on the trail out there, like you better have your game face on and have thought about a lot of things before you start. That's always been the biggest thing for me and the biggest takeaway that, like, man, it's night and day planning a hike in Colorado, Washington, Mexico versus Texas.
Colorado, I mean, definitely like the Rockies, the risk of lightning strike is much, much higher. Actually getting hit by lightning is pretty serious. And then just, altitude. Like if you do end up getting hurt or injured and then you're stuck at 13,000 feet, altitude can be a real problem. We do have extreme altitudes here in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, like Mount Adams is 12,600 feet. Mount Rainier is 14,400 feet, but we don't, but a majority of our mountains are all going to be under 10. So altitude sickness really only applies to here. Really only applies to climbing the big ones.
Hmm.
But most of our hiking, though, just hiking trails or backpacking trails, is going to be done at 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7,000 feet.
Yeah, and I know Jamie, who's in the series right now that's being published on the podcast. He sent me that article and I forwarded it to you. Where I think this was one of the first times that on a Colorado peak they can't get to the body, so they've just left the climber that had
Yeah,
passed away. And
forever on the mountain.
yeah, I that just I just can't imagine. And like even like you and I have followed stories with PCT hikers that they were hiking and disappeared. And like that girl, they found her body 4 years later, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy that and for you being part of the PCT in Washington, how often do you see that happen where these types of stories, not so much injury, but like just the fatalities on the trails?
Somebody goes missing. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if you include climbing, it's a fair bit. Um,
Yeah.
um, Deaths are pretty common on Mount Rainier and then Mount Hood, even more so.
Yeah.
But as far as just hiking, I don't know. It seems like somebody goes missing and then either can't be found or it takes a few years to find them. I don't know, 1 or 2 or 3 times a year. I But like thinking about the numbers though, and the amount of people that are actually climbing in Washington, I don't
Probably
think it's
low.
that high. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it is a. I mean, I'm a big statistics guy. Like, let's be smart, let's be scientific. Hiking is fun. I think what we've done in this country with our public lands and the way in which we preserve these beautiful places so that they can be enjoyed by all of us, and that the public can have benefit from them. I'm a huge fan and advocate of all that. And but they are dangerous, right? Like, and you say this often. Every time you step onto that trail, something can happen. I've heard you say that on lots of your podcasts. And
Yeah.
I am a big proponent of let's be as statistically smart as we can. Like, I'm not worried about getting bit by a poisonous snake at paradise because there aren't any. You know what I mean? And I'm not worried about running out of water because
Yeah.
I mean, could you run out of water in Washington? I mean, I suppose I could contrive some sort of a scenario where something might happen and I end up
Hmm.
dehydrated and then I broke my ankle and now I don't have any water. It could happen. But the chances of that are very small. And same thing with bears. Like, I mean, do I think about bear safety? For sure, but I know statistically, like hypothermia has a way higher chance of getting me than a bear does here. And so I'm all for, like, knowing the area that you're going to be hiking in, whether it's Washington or Texas or Colorado, and and then spending a majority of your time, energy, and effort trying to guard against the things that are most likely to happen. Doesn't mean you don't think of everything. Certainly, we should think of every scenario, but you ultimately can't think of every scenario. But it statistically makes the most sense, though, to spend most of your time doing things that are appropriate to the place that you're in and the season that you're in. That's why
Yeah.
you're so careful about thinking about leaders and with your water and all that, because you
Yeah.
you run out of water more than a day away, up there where you're at, or your hydration bladder pops a hole. Like, you could have a real serious problem.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's almost always going to be hypothermia from getting wet. That's the
Hmm.
I mean, that is the number one thing that's going to happen to you in Washington State. And so let's spend a lot of time thinking about our layering system, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And
So
synthetics, like, I bring no down with me
yeah.
when I'm backpacking. Now, day
Yeah.
hikes, when I know the weather is going to be clear and cold or something, yeah, definitely I might bring my down then. But I'm a synthetic only guy
Yeah.
when I'm backpacking here.
So the greatest story I ever heard was with your mom, and it exactly goes with what you just said. She's terrified of bears, which statistically is probably not going to happen. And she doesn't care about the storms, which
Yeah,
statistically
are gonna happen. Yeah,
are going to happen. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, and then to the listeners, you have to check out episode 2 with the stories of John's mom. They are just some of the best times to just sitting there listening that I've ever had in my
yeah.
life. They're
Yeah,
awesome.
my mom was the greatest. My earliest memories of her is her bringing me camping and hiking in the Davis Mountains. We used to go to Fort Davis State Park there in
No,
West Texas when I was very little. I have memories from being like 3 and 4, sleeping in a tent with her and climbing what to my 3-year-old mind were huge mountains. Um, I've been back as once or twice now as an adult, and I kind of smile at. It's like, well, yeah, this is. I kind of remember how this all looked, but it all seems so much smaller than I remembered it
no.
because I was just a little child. But yeah, and then I moved up here as a teenager with my dad and my stepmom, and then my mom would come up here to visit us on vacations for a few years from Texas, and then eventually she moved up here as well to be with us. And my mom was an avid hiker. Um, she dabbled in climbing a little bit. She's definitely climbed a few mountains with me. She went on a Mount Shasta climb with me in Northern California and a Mount Adams climb, but mostly just a hiker. And she was a school teacher, so during the summertime, she would hike like 5 days a week, 6 days a week, um, and many stories and fond memories of her. When my mother's life, my relationship with my mother and her life began to come to a close was actually when my relationship with Jason kind of came to a beginning.
Yep.
The day that I met Jason and Lori in November of 2017. They're at Guadalupe. Met him on the Tejas Trail,
Hmm.
headed up towards Mount Hunter. Um, it was that day that my mom found out that she had cancer. Ended up being sarcoma. But I got a voicemail. There's hardly any cell service there at Pine Springs. But I remember finding some spot in the parking lot and listening to this voicemail of her telling me that they had found a tumor and that it was cancerous. And so there's always Jason never got to meet my mom, but it's always been interesting to me how those two relationships kind of briefly overlapped.
Yeah.
But I
And every time we get together, I have to hear stories about her because to the listeners, she wasn't just a hiker. She was in beast mode. Like she played for varsity on the hiking team. She didn't just she didn't do little hikes. She didn't do something that well how she's so older. So she's older than us. I'm 51. She was probably in her 60s, just bagging peaks, 100-degree weather,
yeah,
hurricane force winds. She don't care. She was out
yeah.
on the trail.
Yeah, no, she hiked all winter too. I have one of my favorite videos of her. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but we were on the summit of Mount Si in North Bend, Washington. So this is the Interstate 90 corridor as it's heading up into the Cascades a little bit before you get up to Snoqualmie Pass. And it's a famous hike that people do in the wintertime because there's no avalanche danger on it. So you don't have to worry about avalanches, which is always like a huge issue in the winter. But I think it gains like 4,000 feet in 4 miles. So I mean, it's steep and it's hard.
Yeah,
And we got up to the top of that, and that was the most ferocious wind I've ever been in my life. Um,
really.
I mean, it was. I've read about what 50 miles an hour feels like this, and 60 miles an hour feels like this, and 70 feels like this. This had to have been close to 100. There,
Jeez.
it was. I was able to. I've got video and pictures of me leaning over into the wind at more than a 45-degree angle with a heavy pack on, and the wind is holding me up from falling. And
Jeez.
anyways, we were up there in the meadow right where you break out of the tree line, and then there's a kind of a rocky scramble up to the top. But I've got her like walking out into the snow, and the wind is blowing so hard it damn near blows her over. And half the time you can't even see your blue jacket because it's just there's so much ice dust in the air. And And you could hear me in the background going, "Yeah."
Get it?
She's like 58 or 59 in that, I think it was,
Man.
I think the air temperature was, it was super cold, which is rare here, but it was probably in the teens with like
Yeah.
100-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh.
And she's almost 60 years old and up there hiking to the top of a peak in that.
Yeah, and again, I just love the stories, and of course, I have to hear them every time we get together for sure. So, kind of talking about like the safety and this stuff, like, what do you think is the most important tips for someone coming up to Washington and wanting to hike in its wilderness?
Yeah, yeah. So comfortable footwear. I it's difficult for me to describe how, to somebody that does a lot of hiking in mostly flat places, how much different elevation is going to feel. Right.
Yeah,
Um, there are certainly hikes in Washington that are 5 or 6 miles, right? But because of how intense the elevation is, it might be equally as hard as a 16-mile hike that you've done back home. And
yeah,
then also like the rugged nature of how rugged some of the trails are. So footwear that fits good, and is comfortable, and then layers. Um, I mean, it's wild how much the weather can vary, and how, I mean, I've been on trails in the Columbia River Gorge where it's sunny, and we're low at the trailhead, and it's 58 and sunny, and then we get up on top and it's 19 and 60-mile-an-hour winds. And so having those layers, and then a solid waterproof rain pants or shell pants, and then as well as a jacket, and then different insulating layers for the inside, and gloves, for sure. Like I wouldn't go on a backpacking trip without a couple of pairs of gloves,
yeah.
so that I can always at least try to keep one pair dry. But yeah, clothing.
Yeah,
Nothing
and
poisonous
even
is going to bite you.
yeah,
No, we don't have. There's no insects. Don't got to worry about any of that stuff. Yeah, there's water. A lot of water everywhere. Water's kind of a non-issue
yeah.
here. Mostly for most hikes, but yeah, appropriate clothing above and
And
away.
that's something that I've really focused on over the last couple years. Actually, the last year is, I was out in Guad in February and just taking a lot of things for granted, forgot a bunch of stuff. Having a shell, I don't care. Like, okay, in summertime, maybe not, but any other time, just put the shell. It's only a couple of ounces. Put the
Yeah,
shell in your backpack, especially
yeah,
coming up to Washington. Like
yeah,
when you and I did Rainier, I put my shell on, and that's the first time I ever really experienced needing a shell. And man, it was night and day.
yeah.
But just be prepared, and it's okay that you don't use it, like the
Oh, for sure.
shell, some of the other things that you would wanna take, sunglasses, it's,
If you're gonna be in snow,
yeah,
sunglasses.
snow blindness is no
You
joke.
you can get snow blindness here. Yes, you can. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
but you can't take too much stuff, like, that would aid in you at some point, and just be prepared, but that's something that I've really changed, even in my day hikes on the Lone Star Hiking Trail when it starts to get cold. I mean, I have a shell, I have rain pants.
Yeah.
I just take it all and just get into that habit of always taking all this stuff. So then it's never a question, you never forget it. But yeah, it was way cold. It was probably in the 20s, and it was supposed to be a pretty day and it ended up not being a pretty day. It was snowing and I just wasn't prepared, and I was so disgusted with myself,
Mhm.
that I didn't have a shell, I didn't have this, I didn't have a hat, I didn't have, and I'm just like, well, how did I forget all this stuff?
Yeah.
And or even think like, oh, it's supposed to be good weather, I'm not going to need it, and just take it, just take it.
Yeah.
So all right, so how, and I think we probably talked a little bit about this, but in your opinion, what is the best way for hikers to prepare for potential weather or sudden weather changes
Right. Yeah.
up in
It's
Washington?
to have what you need. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I would almost never go on a hike without at least 3 layers. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just, and it just varies so much here. It's really normal for me to be in one layer, just a base layer, and then to be later on to be in three, in one hike, because of the elevation change too often, right? Like the weather is majorly different at 2,000 feet than it is at 5,000 feet. And so very often the summit of the hike, you can like plan on it being pretty chilly and cold, and then yeah, you're gonna be in a t-shirt in the parking lot down lower.
No. Well, that happened to us on our hike. We hiked up, it started snowing on us, and then we were like, oh crap. We got to the peak, bazillion feet of snow. And then we were like racing down because, of course, uh, we were hoping that as we got further down that it would turn to rain and not be in snow, but it ended up being snow.
Yeah.
So
Didn't it get really windy too up top?
yes,
It
yes.
very often is up there.
Yeah, it was probably one of the prettiest hikes that I've ever done. And
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it was crazy.
so Texas listeners, Jason says it's probably one of the prettier hikes I've ever done. That area that you were in is actually just owned by the county. It's not even
Really?
that's not even state land. That's literally just county. It's not. That's how beautiful Washington is, right? This isn't even a
Yeah.
state park. It's not a state park. It's not a federal forest. That's not a national park. That area it's a little bit outside of the national scenic area, which is mostly just on the Oregon side. But yeah, that's Washington.
Jeez. No, it was spectacular, and that hike was definitely in my top 5 probably that I've ever done. It was spectacular, and I got to hang out with you, so that was cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So, we're on a trail. You started without me. I didn't even know you were gonna be on the trail. You started hiking, and I run into you. What's gonna be on your day pack? What are the essential items you're bringing on a, let's say, spring, fall hike? What are you,
Okay.
what's gonna be in the pack?
Yeah. So this is a thing that the day that I summited Guadalupe Peak in Texas, I discovered how much I liked this. But I tend to bring a food thermos and bring like soup or chili or something warm.
Yeah.
And I'll just put it in one of those, the food thermoses that we used to have like when we were kids, your mom might put
Yep.
them in your lunchbox or whatever. And I will bring warm lunch. And so I'll have that in there. Um, Sometimes I'll have a water bottle. Sometimes I won't. Depends on what trail I'm on and what the weather happens to be like. But one thing that I would definitely say, this is a thing I'm a big proponent of this, but I love hats. I mean, I'm wearing one right now. Got my
Mhm.
other hat right here that I always have on, but I don't wear hats in the mountains. And here's what I mean by that. I always have hoods. Um, so I always wear sun hoodies. I love the one that your merch store has, by the way, the white
Yep.
one. Um,
Yep.
but a sun hoodie, and then I'm gonna have some sort of a base layer, like a Patagonia R1, or right now I'm wearing I think this is Brooks,
Yep.
but it's gonna have a hood, right? And then I'm gonna have some sort of typically a synthetic jacket that's made for warmth, like I mean, the Enlightened Equipment makes a famous one that everybody knows of. I have a Patagonia one, but some kind of a synthetic micro puff type of a jacket, and then I'll have my rain shell on the outside of that. But the reason why I love hoods so much is because you don't have to stop. Like if you get hot, you got to figure. Like if you get hot and you're wearing a stocking hat, well then typically you're taking your pack off to put it back in your in the lid, or you're having your partner do it or whatever. But with hoods, it's so easy to just flip them off, flip them on, flip them off, and you don't have to do anything. So, we go around a corner to where we're not in the sun anymore, and now we're in the shade, and it's going to be much colder in there. It's really easy for me to just flip the hood up to keep warm, or whatever. But I would always have that. I'm typically going to have a paper map. A lot of the places I hike, I've already been, and I like have it memorized, and I really don't even hardly need a map. But I
Yeah.
love, especially on breaks, pulling out a paper map and looking around and just thinking about things. And then I'm always going to have maps downloaded electronically on some kind of a navigation app on my phone. which I'd love to talk more extensively about because that's come up on your podcast a few times.
That's the next question.
Oh, cool. Yeah. But yeah, that would be my main stuff. Whatever snacks I'm into at a given moment. I very often bring green grapes and then like literally just slices of cheddar cheese like cut off of a block. And the reason why I do that is my mom always had that. It makes me think of her.
Oh, nice. So that was her
Grapes
go-to
grapes
snack.
and cheese, and then something hot in a food thermos would be my food. And then I typically almost always have sunglasses, although sometimes in Washington, when I'm 100% positive the weather is going to be bad, I won't bring sunglasses. There obviously wouldn't be any reason for them. Sunscreen, I keep a very, very small thing of sunscreen, but I'm paranoid. My mom also had skin cancer, and I'm paranoid about too much sun exposure, so I always cover up head to toe.
Yeah.
Even when it's hot, I just wear a very, very thin sun hoodie and thin pants, and then that way the only sunscreen that I'm messing with is just my nose and my cheekbones, basically.
Yeah.
That would be about it for that. Yeah, and then I never ever leave home without my camera or a camera of some kind.
Man,
But that's neither here nor there. That
hold on. To the listeners, we are in, I don't know, 40 feet of snow on the Paradise Trail
oh yeah,
in
Mount Rainier. Yeah.
Rainier.
Yep.
And I'm in micro spikes, and man, I got micro spikes, trekking poles. I've got everything so I don't die. And John is in just normal Brooks with a bazillion-dollar camera, bazillion-dollar lens, just sliding around, like purposely sliding down the mountain and taking pictures. And I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah,
Talking about avalanches, and we need to cross this quickly. And
I love standing glissades. Instead of
Yeah.
glissading down the snow on your butt, you just
your
do
butt,
it.
yeah,
It's basically like skiing without skis on, I guess, more or less.
yeah,
And the snow conditions have to be just right for that. It has to be not quite fully frozen, but almost fully frozen, just like slight soft layer on top, and then you can definitely glissade on your feet fast down the mountain.
mm-hmm. Yeah, you were, and I'm thinking, man, if you slip all that camera gear,
I'm really really comfortable in snow. I mean,
Mhm.
you're getting into rock climbing more and more and more. Once in a while you'll encounter somebody that's just, I mean, they're just so, their movements and everything are so fluid and graceful on the rock.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like that on snow because I've spent so much of my life walking on it and hiking in it and hiking on it that I don't know. I guess I'm just really comfortable with how it behaves, and it doesn't surprise me.
no,
It's something. I can't even remember the last time I like slipped or like I fell on the snow or something. I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming.
yeah. Well, knock on wood, because your winter's coming. So, kind of going back in what we were just talking about, cell phones and maps and stuff. How important does, like, these cell phone navigation apps also with having a paper map as it relates to hiking in Washington?
Yeah. So first thing I would address is just the whole technology issue. A lot of the hiking and climbing community has been, the older folks that are older than me have been somewhat reluctant to embrace the role of technology,
Really?
like navigational apps, right?
Mhm.
The Park Service was kind of especially bad at this for quite a while, where I was like, and the notion was always like, well, what are you going to do if your battery runs dead on that cell phone right there? Or what are you going to do if you drop your cell phone off a cliff? And it's like, well, what are you going to do if you drop your paper map off a cliff? You're going to have just as much of a problem, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like apps do depend on battery capacity for sure. But they're both just tools, and they both have their advantages and disadvantages, and knowing how those tools work and so forth. I mean, you shouldn't. I don't care whether it's crampons or a tent or a climbing helmet or a map. Like, you should know how it works and what it can do and what it can't do. And I'm a big advocate of navigational apps on cell phones. They work fantastically. They use the exact same technology that dedicated GPS units like a Garmin would use. There's literally no reason. There's no reason, none, for you to buy some kind of a Garmin or one of the other companies' GPS navigational units. Now, satellite communications like you get with the Mini, that's different. Like the ability to actually like send out texts instead of through cell towers, but through satellites. Yes, that certainly is valuable. But strictly for navigating, the apps that you can get for your cell phone are literally just as good. Typically, you're going to pay a little bit, like either an annual fee or a monthly fee for a good one, right? But they're so much quicker too. I've taken navigational classes. I know how to get out a map and a compass and to triangulate my position on a map. I know how to do all that, but it is painfully slow compared to opening up the app and then immediately seeing your ping right on a topographic map, and then being able to record where you've been, right, is immensely helpful. And so, like anything else, though, you need to there's a learning curve to them. You can't just buy one of those apps, never have used it before, and then go on a backpacking trip and think you're going to understand it. You're not. Like you definitely need to practice with it. Most all of them, I mean, you can practice by going for a walk in your neighborhood, right? And like literally learn how to download the map for your neighborhood, and then put your phone in airplane mode, shut it off to where, it's not talking to any cell towers, and then just track learn how to track your little walk that you go on around your neighborhood, and then get familiar with, okay, how do I get back to where I've been before? And familiarize yourself with how those things work. They work fantastically. I have several friends that are professional guides. It's literally what they do for a living. They guide people, ski guiding in the wintertime or mountaineering guiding in the summer, and that's how they navigate. Brandon carries a paper map. One of my good friends that's a guide, he always does have a paper map, but he exclusively navigates with a program on his iPhone. They literally do work fantastic, but you just need to understand their limitations, what they can and they can't do. That very much came up in one of your episodes where you were talking to the gentleman that had been lost for multiple days and rescued, and a big part of that story and the contributing factors to that was battery, right? He did have a map, and then the battery died, right? And he wasn't fully sure of where he was, and it was one of the major facts in that whole entire story. Fantastic episode, by the way. I've listened to that one more than once. That one was fantastic. And then since that particular episode, and then some of your further episodes that you've recorded and published, I've heard you talk about bringing a battery charger, right, or some kind of a battery bank to go with your cell phone. Here's what I would love to share with your listeners, and I do a lot of I have a background of doing a fair bit of kind of harder climbing. I was very much into rock climbing in my 20s. Used to push hard. I was, pretty regularly climbing things that I was falling off of all the time, and really pushing the limits, pushing my limits. I did a lot of that stuff, and then I got into, climbing a lot of the big volcanoes, the Shastas and so forth. And now, kind of my favorite thing to do is what I would call like adventure backpacking. So maybe I'm using some established trails, but then I'm also going off trail. Or another favorite thing to do is to just go backpacking on very popular trails like the Wonderland Trail at Mount Rainier, but go early in the season when significant portions of it are still covered by snow. And then there's no people out there, right? Because the snow hasn't melted yet, which is what we did. But the Wonderland Trail, when we went at the end of June of this year, it was about 60% dry and 40% snow covered. So we're looking at, 60 miles of dry trail and 40-ish miles of snow. And so that's going to involve a lot of navigation, right? And so ahead of time, I had downloaded all the maps for all the places where the Wonderland Trail would be. One of the things that happens sometimes when you're navigating through an area that's completely snow covered is it doesn't even make sense to be right where the trail was. You would want to go a different way, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's to avoid different kinds of hazards, snow hazards, or places where rivers or creeks are still bridged over. It might not be safe to cross it where the trail normally crosses it. You might need to, go further up or further down or whatever. So very often we're not really on the trail. We're just kind of paralleling the trail, or we're near it, or whatever. Or a lot of times in the woods, you'd think you could see where the trail was when the trail through the woods, the Wonderland sections that are down below timberline. You'd think when it was covered with snow, it would be obvious where the trail is. Like there's a hole in the woods, like a corridor.
Yeah.
It's really not actually that way at all.
Oh man.
It's super confusing, and you just feel like you're in the middle of the woods. You wouldn't even a lot of times you wouldn't even guess that there was a trail anywhere underneath of you. So anyways, like it's navigationally challenging. There's a lot of navigation doing early season backpacking trips like that, or climbing trips. And so I would download the maps ahead of time, and I would track where I'm at, and anytime I'm in confusing sections, I'm pulling that out, and I'm definitely looking at the topographic lines a lot, right? Because the topographic lines will tell you how steep things are. And so if you're down in a valley and you need to be up on that ridge, who really cares where the trail goes in the summertime? Like what are the certain depending on how steep the snow is in certain places is either going to be safer or scarier or whatever. But and so you need to have enough battery, right, to make that thing last. Well, here's a huge tip, and this is true for just day hikers. You download those maps ahead of time, right? You're going to go on this day hike.
And that wraps up another exciting episode of the Trailblazing Texas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode today, and stay tuned for our next episode where we will pick back up where we left off and guarantee to uncover many more hiking gems and share many more tips to enhance your experience on the trail. Until then, happy trails and happy hiking.